What did humans do before they had clothes? You get dressed every morning without thinking about it. You pull on a shirt. You find a pair of pants. You spend 30 seconds looking for a sock that has somehow vanished into another dimension. Maybe you put on a jacket because the weather application says it will be slightly cold, which could mean a pleasant breeze or the atmosphere attempting to remove your skin. The entire process takes a few minutes. Simple, ordinary, barely worth noticing. Now remove everything. No shirt, no pants, no shoes, no socks, no blanket, no towel, no emergency hoodie hanging over the back of a chair, no fabric of any kind, no leather jacket, no woven basket full of spare clothes. No closet quietly containing more insulation than an entire prehistoric community could have produced in a lifetime. Now imagine that the sun is going down. The temperature drops. Wind begins moving across the open ground. Rain starts falling. You have exposed skin, vulnerable fingers, vulnerable toes, and a body that must remain within a very narrow temperature range if it intends to continue being alive. There is no store. There is no delivery service. There is no helpful label telling you that something is waterproof, wind-resistant, breathable, or suitable for machine washing. There is only you, the landscape, the people around you, and whatever knowledge your group has managed to preserve. So, what did humans actually do before they had clothes? Did they simply endure the cold? Did they spend every winter pressed against a fire? Did they wait inside caves until the weather became reasonable again? Or were prehistoric humans walking around completely naked, covered in dirt, and somehow too tough to care? The honest answer is that there was never one clean moment when humans went from naked to dressed. Clothing did not appear as a single invention. There was no prehistoric morning when everyone woke up exposed and one unusually productive person invented pants before lunch. The story happened in stages. Before clothing, some of our ancestors had much more body hair than we do. Later, humans lived mainly in climates where exposed skin was useful rather than immediately dangerous. They chose protected places to sleep. They moved at certain times of day. They built shelters, shared body heat, controlled fire, used dry vegetation as bedding, and eventually began wrapping themselves in animal hides. Long before tailored jackets, fitted sleeves, or carefully sewn boots, there was probably a long period of simple coverings: a skin over the shoulders, fur wrapped around an infant, a hide placed under a sleeping body, a strip tied around the waist, a rough covering held in place by cord, sinew, or a hand that was already very tired of holding it. Clothing was not one invention. It was a long negotiation between skin and weather. And to understand what humans did before clothes, we have to begin with a slightly embarrassing fact. Humans are not naturally naked in the same way that a lizard is naturally naked. We are primates that lost most of our visible fur. Our distant ancestors did not begin the human story looking exactly like modern people without clothes. Early members of our lineage inherited hairy bodies from earlier primates. Body hair was the original insulation system. It trapped air close to the skin, reduced heat loss, and provided some protection from sunlight, insects, scratches, and changing temperatures. For a very long time, there was no need to invent an artificial coat because the body was already manufacturing one. Then something changed. Human body hair gradually became shorter, finer, and less dense across much of the body. Scientists still debate exactly when this happened and which evolutionary pressures mattered most. Hair does not fossilize well. It does not leave a neat outline in stone with a date written beside it. Researchers have to reconstruct the story indirectly, through genetics, anatomy, skin biology, parasites, and the way the human body controls temperature. One of the strongest explanations involves heat. Humans are unusually good at sweating. We have large numbers of sweat glands spread across much of our skin. When sweat reaches relatively bare skin and evaporates, it carries heat away from the body. Dense fur makes that process less efficient because moisture becomes trapped in the hair. For an animal moving through a hot, open environment, losing body hair could provide an enormous advantage. Imagine following an animal across sun-heated grassland. The animal is faster than you. It is stronger than you. It can probably kick hard enough to make your day very short, but it cannot release heat as efficiently while running. You can. You continue walking, you continue tracking, you sweat, you allow air to move across your skin. The animal must eventually stop, slow down, or find shade. Suddenly, being mostly hairless is not a strange weakness. It is part of a cooling system. Less hair meant better heat loss. Better heat loss meant longer periods of movement during hot parts of the day. It allowed early humans to travel, forage, hunt, and carry food under conditions that forced many other animals to rest. That sounds like an excellent deal. And in hot environments, it was. But evolution rarely gives anything away for free. The body that releases heat beautifully under a tropical sun also loses heat very quickly when the air becomes cold. Add wind, rain, wet ground, or a long inactive night, and the cooling system becomes a serious problem. Human evolution had created a specialist. Early humans became extremely effective at surviving heat, but they were not yet naturally prepared for every climate on the planet. So before clothes, humans did something that modern people sometimes forget is an option. They lived where their bodies could survive. We often imagine ancient humans as if the entire world was available to them, and they simply wandered wherever they felt like going. But climate placed hard limits on movement. Mostly hairless humans could not walk into every environment with the same ease. Warm regions were safer. Lower elevations were often easier. Valleys, forests, caves, rock shelters, and areas protected from wind offered better conditions than exposed plains or high mountains. A difference of only a few degrees could matter. A dry sleeping place could matter. A wall of rock that blocked the wind could matter. A slope that caught the morning sun could matter. Before humans carried warmth on their bodies, they searched for warmth in the landscape. They also managed time. In hot environments, activity could happen in the cooler morning or late afternoon. In colder conditions, people could move during daylight and rest when temperatures fell. They could choose campsites that received sunlight early in the day. They could avoid valleys where cold air gathered during the night. They could remember which caves stayed dry during heavy rain and which ones slowly filled with water while everyone was asleep. None of this required a written weather forecast. It required memory. It required experience. It required someone surviving a bad decision and explaining it to everyone else. Modern people might look at an ancient landscape and see trees, rocks, grass, and perhaps a nice place for a photograph. Someone who had lived there for decades would see an enormous map of thermal information. That person would know which trees stopped rain, which plants remained dry inside, which stones stayed warm after sunset, which direction the winter wind came from, which valley became dangerously cold, which animal paths led to sheltered ground, which clouds meant that everyone needed to move immediately. That knowledge was a form of technology. Before humans wore insulation, they lived inside information. And then there were other people. A lone human is not especially impressive. We have no claws, we have no armor, we are not particularly fast, we take a long time to mature, we become helpless when badly injured. Human babies arrive in the world with almost no ability to protect themselves and then spend an extraordinary amount of time requiring continuous attention. A newborn antelope may attempt to stand within a short period after birth. A newborn human cannot even hold its own head with reliable confidence. Keeping an infant warm before clothing required direct contact. Babies could be carried against an adult body. Children could sleep between adults. People could curl together in groups, placing the youngest, oldest, injured, or weakest members near the center. Huddling sounds too simple to count as an invention, but it works. Every human body produces heat. When people press close together, the group exposes less total surface area to the cold relative to the amount of heat being generated. Warm air becomes trapped between bodies. Wind reaches fewer surfaces. Infants receive warmth from adults rather than trying to produce all of it themselves. The social group became a living insulation system. You have probably experienced a comfortable modern version of this when someone moved close to you on a cold night and claimed to be sharing body heat, even though that person was clearly attempting to steal the blanket. For early humans, there was no blanket to steal. The group was the blanket. And in a deeper sense, the group was the first coat. This is important because the question, what did humans do before clothes, makes the problem sound individual. It was not. Cold survival was collective. One person could gather fuel while another watched children. One person could maintain a fire while another slept. One person could remember how to prepare a hide while another knew where to find dry grass. An injured person could remain alive because others brought food and warmth. Humans did not survive difficult climates because every individual was exceptionally tough. They survived because they refused to remain individuals when being alone became dangerous. Shelter was another layer. A cave does not need to feel warm to save your life. It only needs to be warmer, drier, or less windy than the open land outside. Wind is especially dangerous because it removes the thin layer of warm air that the body creates near the skin. Rain makes the problem worse. Water carries heat away from the body much faster than dry air. A temperature that feels uncomfortable while you are dry can become dangerous once your skin is wet and wind begins moving across it. So early humans used the landscape as architecture. They placed rock behind them. They slept beneath overhangs. They selected caves with manageable entrances. They constructed windbreaks from branches. They used vegetation to close gaps. They chose places where smoke could escape, but rain could not easily enter. These structures were probably far more common than the archaeological record makes them appear. Stone survives. Branches do not. Bone sometimes survives. Grass, bark, wood, rope, hide, and leaves usually disappear. This creates a strange distortion in our image of prehistory. We find stone tools, so we imagine ancient people constantly holding stones. We forget that most of their material world was probably made from substances that decayed. Imagine future archaeologists reconstructing modern civilization after almost everything has vanished except toilets, bricks, and a few metal forks. They might conclude that our entire culture revolved around bathrooms, walls, and extremely serious eating rituals. Early human shelter probably included materials we will never recover. But sleeping surfaces leave hints. People placed layers of grass, leaves, branches, bark, ash, and animal skin beneath their bodies. This separated them from cold ground. The ground is an enormous heat thief. Lie directly on it, and your body spends the night attempting to warm a planet that has no intention of returning the favor. Place a layer of dry vegetation underneath you, and something changes. Air becomes trapped between the plant fibers. Heat moves away more slowly. The body remains drier. Insects may also become less troublesome depending on the materials used. This was not a mattress in the modern sense. It was thermal engineering. Then came fire, and the entire relationship between humans and cold changed. Evidence suggests that early human groups were controlling fire hundreds of thousands of years ago, with some important sites preserving hearths that are around 790,000 years old. Earlier fire use may have occurred, but researchers continue to debate how regular and deliberate it was. Once humans could reliably maintain fire, they gained something no other animal had: controllable, external heat. Fire warmed exposed skin. It dried wet materials. It made shelters more comfortable. It allowed people to remain active after sunset. It provided light, helped discourage some predators, and made certain foods easier to digest. But fire was not a magical force field. It required work. It needed fuel. It needed air. It needed protection from rain. It could fill a shelter with smoke. It could burn bedding, skin, hair, tools, and anything else placed too close. Fire also warms unevenly. Your front becomes comfortable while your back begins quietly preparing a formal complaint. People had to turn, move, reposition, and arrange sleeping areas around the heat. Someone had to tend the fire during long nights. Someone had to preserve embers so that the group did not have to produce a new flame from nothing every morning. The power of fire did not come only from the flame. It came from the knowledge surrounding the flame. Which wood burned slowly? Which wood produced too much smoke? How could embers be covered and kept alive? How far should bedding remain from sparks? How could a hearth be placed so that heat entered a shelter without smoke becoming unbearable? The flame was useful. The system was revolutionary. And still, fire had limits. You could not carry a large hearth while traveling. You could not stand beside it while hunting. You could not depend on it during every storm. A mostly hairless human could survive a cold evening beside a strong fire and still be in serious danger the moment the group had to leave. This is where movies get prehistoric humans completely wrong. Films often show people moving across snowy landscapes while wearing one decorative strip of fur positioned carefully enough to keep the actor recognizable. Everyone looks cold, but also strangely attractive. Their hair moves dramatically. Nobody has frostbite. Nobody loses the ability to use their fingers. Nobody spends the entire journey discussing how much they regret leaving the cave. That is not a realistic picture of cold exposure. A human body cannot simply decide to become immune to winter. Shivering produces heat, but it uses enormous amounts of energy. Blood vessels near the skin narrow to reduce heat loss, which helps protect the core but makes hands and feet colder. Fine movements become difficult, judgment becomes slower, exhaustion increases. Wet skin and wind accelerate every stage of the problem. Determination is useful. Determination is not insulation. Some ancient human populations did develop body forms that conserved heat more effectively. A broad, compact body loses heat more slowly than a tall, narrow one because it has less surface area relative to its volume. Neanderthals, for example, had broad chests, strong bodies, and relatively short lower arms and lower legs. Those proportions were useful in the cold environments of Ice Age Eurasia. Earlier, humans adapted to hotter climates often had longer limbs and narrower bodies that released heat more efficiently. Biology mattered. But biology alone was not enough. Food also mattered. Producing body heat requires energy. Shivering consumes calories. Walking produces heat. Digestion produces heat. Fat stores energy that can be used when food becomes scarce. A well-fed group moving through cold conditions had a better chance than an exhausted, hungry group. A person protected from wind had a better chance than someone standing in the open. A dry person had a better chance than a wet one. So the pre-clothing survival system involved many layers working together. Body shape, movement, food, shelter, dry bedding, fire, shared warmth, site selection, seasonal knowledge. Humans did not have one replacement for clothing. They had an entire collection of partial solutions. Then we reach the most important complication in the story. What exactly counts as clothing? Does an animal hide placed over the shoulders count? What about fur wrapped around a baby? What about a skin used as bedding during the night and carried over the body when rain begins? Does it become clothing only when it is tied in place? Only when it has holes? Only when two pieces are joined together? Only when someone adds decoration and announces that brown fur is going to be very popular this winter? There was almost certainly a long stage of clothing before tailored clothing. Humans hunted and scavenged animals for meat, fat, bone, sinew, and skin. Once an animal had been processed, the hide was an obvious material. A fresh hide, however, is not automatically a coat. It is wet. It is heavy. It contains tissue and fat. It begins to decay. If it dries without being properly worked, it can become stiff and difficult to use. Turning animal skin into a durable covering requires knowledge. Tissue must be removed. The hide may need to be scraped, stretched, dried, softened, smoked, rubbed with fat, or repeatedly worked. These methods did not need to appear as one complete invention. They could develop through thousands of small observations. One hide dried near smoke and lasted longer. Another became softer after being rubbed with fat. One type of skin worked better than another. Fur facing inward trapped more warmth. A hide stretched during drying remained easier to use. Someone noticed. Someone remembered. Someone taught a child. That is how technology grows when there are no books, no written instructions, and no video explaining the process in 10 simple steps. The oldest clothing rarely survives because skin, fur, cord, and plant fiber decay. Scientists therefore have to search for indirect clues. One of the strangest clues comes from lice. Human head lice live mainly in hair. Clothing lice live mainly in garments and move to the body to feed. Clothing lice could not develop their particular way of life until humans were wearing clothing often and consistently enough to create a permanent habitat. Genetic studies comparing head lice and clothing lice suggest that habitual clothing may have appeared somewhere between roughly 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. That range is extremely broad. It does not tell us the exact day clothing was invented. It does not tell us what the garments looked like. But it tells us something remarkable. The earliest clothes did not leave us a label. They left us parasites. Bone tools provide another kind of clue. At Contrabandier's Cave, in what is now Morocco, archaeologists found specialized bone tools dating from roughly 120,000 to 90,000 years ago. Some of these tools appear suitable for scraping, smoothing, and processing hides. Animal bones from the site also carry marks that suggest certain animals were skinned for fur rather than only butchered for meat. There was no preserved coat hanging on the cave wall. But the tools suggest that early Homo sapiens were already treating skins with considerable skill. At Blombos Cave in southern Africa, bone awls dating to around 77,000 years ago show that humans could pierce holes through soft materials such as hide. Once holes can be made, materials can be tied together. Pieces can overlap. A covering can be secured instead of held by hand. A cloak can remain attached while someone walks. A skin can be shaped around a child. A foot can be wrapped. This is the difference between carrying insulation and wearing it. Later, needles with eyes allowed people to pull thread, sinew, or fiber through smaller holes and create tighter seams. That development changed everything. A loose hide protects part of the body, but it shifts during movement. Wind enters through gaps. Warm air escapes. Arms and legs remain exposed. A fitted garment traps warm air close to the skin. Sleeves protect the arms. Leg coverings protect the lower body. Hoods protect the head and neck. Footwear separates skin from snow, sharp ground, and frozen surfaces. A cloak is useful. A fitted sleeve is engineering. Clothing became portable shelter. Instead of remaining near the cave, you carried part of the cave with you. Instead of remaining beside the fire, you trapped a small layer of warmth around your own body. This allowed humans to move farther into cold environments, remain active during colder seasons, travel across exposed terrain, carry infants more safely, and spend longer periods away from shelter. Clothing did not merely make uncomfortable weather easier. It expanded the human world. Before reliable clothing, climate placed strict limits on where mostly hairless humans could live. Once clothing became more effective, those limits moved. Humans entered places their bodies had not evolved to tolerate naturally. Most animals adapt to climate through anatomy. They grow thicker fur. They store more fat. They change circulation. They develop compact bodies. Humans increasingly adapted through culture. Instead of waiting thousands of generations for evolution to produce a thicker coat, humans removed the coat from another animal, processed it, shaped it, and wore the solution. We moved adaptation outside the body. Fire became external heat. Shelter became an external shell. Clothing became external fur. And cultural adaptation could change much faster than biological evolution. A useful sewing method could spread within a lifetime. A better way to soften hide could be taught to neighboring groups. A successful boot design could be copied. A child did not need to be born with thicker skin. The child only needed to be born into a community that knew how to make warm clothing. This is the part of prehistoric technology that is easy to underestimate. Clothes were not produced by one genius working alone. They depended on accumulated knowledge. Someone had to know which animals provided the best hides. Someone had to skin the animal without destroying the material. Someone had to scrape it. Someone had to prepare cord. Someone had to shape bone tools. Someone had to pierce holes without tearing the edge. Someone had to understand how the pieces fit around a moving body. Someone had to teach the entire process. Clothing was a social technology. It contained generations of observation inside every seam. And then, because human beings cannot leave a practical object practical for very long, clothing began to carry meaning. Once people had coverings, those coverings could be decorated. Shells could be attached. Teeth could be added. Pigments could be applied. Patterns could identify a group. Materials could show where someone had traveled, which animals they had hunted, what skills they possessed, or what position they held within a community. The object that protected the body became a surface for identity. A garment could say, "I belong here." It could say, "I am part of this group." It could say, "I crossed that mountain." It could say, "I know how to obtain materials that you do not." It could perhaps even say, "Yes, I know this fur is impressive. Please stop staring." That transformation is deeply human. We invent something because the weather is trying to kill us. Then we decorate it. So what did humans do before they had clothes? At the very beginning, their ancestors had more body hair. Later, mostly hairless humans remained concentrated in climates where exposed skin was manageable. They used geography, seasonal timing, movement, food, fire, shelter, bedding, and shared body heat. They pressed children against warm bodies. They slept close together. They placed vegetation beneath themselves. They chose caves and rock shelters. They blocked wind. They maintained flames. They learned the landscape in extraordinary detail. Then they began using animal hides. At first, the line between bedding, shelter, blanket, and clothing was probably unclear. A skin could serve several purposes. Over time, humans learned to preserve hides, soften them, tie them, pierce them, join them, shape them, and eventually sew them into fitted garments. There was no single moment when naked humanity suddenly became dressed. There were thousands of small improvements. A hide placed beneath a sleeping child. A fur turned inward for warmth. A strip wrapped around a foot. A better knot. A cleaner hole. A seam that did not tear. A hood that stayed in place during wind. A boot that kept snow away from the skin. Most of those experiments left no archaeological trace, but they changed where humans could go. They changed how long humans could travel. They changed which seasons could be endured. They changed how infants were protected. They changed the speed at which culture could overcome biology. And tomorrow morning, when you stand in front of a closet filled with clothing and somehow announce that you have absolutely nothing to wear, pause for a moment. Look at the sleeves. Look at the seams. Look at the layers of fabric designed to trap warm air. Look at the shoes separating your feet from the ground. Look at the zipper, buttons, pockets, hood, lining, and carefully shaped pieces that allow the garment to move with your body. Every part of it is the descendant of a problem solved beside a fire. Every seam carries the memory of someone who once pierced animal skin with stone or bone. Every layer represents a small artificial climate. Every sleeve is a portable wall. Every shoe is a piece of landscape protection carried under the foot. Getting dressed feels ordinary because humanity solved the problem so completely that you no longer notice the danger it removed. But underneath the cotton, wool, leather, buttons, and zippers is one of the oldest human ideas of all. If the body cannot adapt fast enough, build it another body.